It's fortuitous, I suppose, that this week Donald Trump enacted a travel ban, a ban on travel for citizens of 12 different countries. Those countries are Afghanistan, Myanmar, Chad, the Republic of Congo, Equatorial Guinea, Eritrea, Haiti, Iran, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and Yemen. And there will also be heightened restrictions on visitors from Burundi, Cuba, Laos, Sierra Leone, Togo, Turkmenistan, and Venezuela. The ban was announced on Thursday and goes into effect Monday, preventing citizens of those nations from entering the U.S. Trump also had a travel ban in his first term, which after many lawsuits and various court rulings was eventually upheld by the Supreme Court. There's a twisted Trumpian logic to some of the countries being on the list. Trump has a particular animus towards Haiti. It is, after all, the blackest nation in the hemisphere. That is to say, the largest population in the Caribbean, and the product of a revolt against slavery. His now famous tirade about shithole countries was directed at Haiti. Last year, during his campaign, he was responsible for amplifying the debunked tales of Haitians in Springfield, Ohio, my mother's hometown, Springfield, Ohio, eating dogs and cats. Iran is a permanent target of the U.S., as is Yemen. African countries are on the list because they're African. Eritrea, as a socialist country, of course, is not surprising, but others just because they're Africans. I think they threw darts at a map and said you've got to have a certain number of African countries, and that's how they ended up there. But Trump, in his words, said these countries have horrendous people, his words, who overstay visas. So there's a crazy rhyme reasons Trump's choices, but we can't forget why people leave their countries in the first place, and why certain people are welcome while others are not. I'm going to read a portion of an article I wrote for the Black Agenda Report last year, which I entitled Racist Asylum and Immigration Policy in the U.S. and Canada. And this is some of what I wrote. The U.S. and Canada, and its neighbor Canada, have both given preference to citizens of Ukraine. Russia's special military operations sent thousands of Ukrainians out of their country in search of safety from warfare. That's not unusual. Wars always create displacement. Both the U.S. and its junior partner Canada have been responsible for huge waves of migration internationally, with their policies of intervention and so-called wars against terror. It is seldom reported that U.S.-led wars against Iraq, Afghanistan, Yemen, Syria, Somalia, and Libya displaced some 38 million people beginning in 2001. Those people in need of refuge were ignored because their suffering was a direct result of U.S., Canada, and collective West actions. Yet some asylum seekers are considered superior to others, and that fact is never more clear than when the people in question are white and from Europe. Canada has already admitted more than 900,000 Ukrainians since 2022, and they're eligible for full panoply of benefits, including healthcare, housing, and a direct path to permanent residency. And an additional 90,000 are expected to arrive this month. African asylum seekers are treated quite differently and sleep on the streets in Toronto and other cities until they can find shelter. In order to stop an influx of asylum seekers from Mexico, Canada recently reinstated a visa requirement. Canada has a long history of favoring Ukrainians in immigration policy. After World War II, members of Nazi collaborator SS units were actively recruited to emigrate to Canada in order to oppose left-wing union activism and to add an anti-communist population. now a new crop of white and right-wing Europeans have been given red carpet treatment, thus killing two birds with one stone. I also want to add here that the U.S. has been thousands of Ukrainians, more than 270,000 in 2 years, and modified its own rules by giving them extensions on what was supposed to be temporary humanitarian parole. Ukrainians get most favored immigrant status because the U.S. is waging a proxy war against Russia because they are white. Unquote. Speaking of Canada, just last year, the then Prime Minister Justin Trudeau announced cuts in the number of people allowed to immigrate there. Canada reduced the number of permanent residents by more than 20%. And Trudeau said his government didn't get the balance quite right when it bolstered immigration post-pandemic to address labor shortages. Labor is at the heart of this discussion. Here's another example from Texas. This is a headline I saw recently. Texas talks tough on immigration, but lawmakers won't force most private companies to check employment authorization. And my friend and comrade Peter Lamenia of the Green Party said, well, of course not. Immigration law is meant to create a pool of super exploitable labor for the bourgeoisie, regardless of the rhetoric, unquote. So immigration policy is a combination of racist sentiment and a contradictory desire for cheap and disposable labor. Sometimes racism wins out, while at other junctures, the capitalist desire for workers wins. And of course, Trump presents all of these impulses simultaneously. Right now, he is the one fully racist, dispensing with all the policies which gave preference to people for the states the U.S. was targeting, so that citizens of the Latin American nations that dared to be socialist, Cuba, Nicaragua, Venezuela, were given preference. Not anymore. He hasn't eased the sanctions or any of the other policies that cause suffering there, while simultaneously telling them to get out. And yes, seeing pro-Trump Cubans come play down brings out the pettiness in all of us. Well, it does for me anyway. But it's clear that overall, U.S. imperialism is a driver for immigration. Until the wars on terror, better understood as wars of terror, millions of people had no intention of leaving Libya or Somalia, or Yemen. But some 30 million have. And by the way, we can thank George W. Bush and Barack Obama and Donald Trump and Joe Biden for creating all of these crises. Haitians and others given temporary protective status are also being told to leave. Haiti has been undone by U.S. occupation 100 years ago, public governments and coups that have undone that nation's democracy. How many Haitians would be here absent these U.S. foreign policy choices? I mentioned Ukraine as a case of white people being welcomed, but Trump has chosen white South Africans, alleged victims of terrorism, and welcomed them as refugees, while ending the refugee status of anybody else. Now thousands of white South Africans are fulfilling Trump's dream of increasing white immigration, and not only that, right-wing white people, a double win for Trump. Lest we forget that in his now infamous comments about shithole countries, he mused about whether the U.S. can attract Norwegians. Norway has a safety net, free college, free healthcare, free everything. Why would they come here? But that was not his point now, was it? In short, imperialism, capitalism, and racism are all at the heart of debates over immigration in the U.S. and in the collective West. And we cannot discuss this issue without acknowledging that fact. Thank you. Thank you so much.